Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host Heidi, and today we are talking about some action-packed films. We'll be talking about Bumblebee and Transformers. So in general, you could say we're talking about the Transformers series, but really I am talking about the film that started it all with its namesake, Transformers, and the most recent film in the franchise, Bumblebee. Also, I just want to be transparent. I didn't really want to see Bumblebee. I was not intrigued by the trailers, and I feel like there have just been too many Transformers movies. Like, there have been 5 already. Like, Bumblebee is the 6th, I believe. So, why did I go see this movie? Well, I wanted to be proven wrong. I had read that critics were very fond of this film, and that it told a different story beyond just, like, fighting robots. And also because I think Hailee Steinfeld is a great actor. Because I predict this movie would be another, like, juvenile, honestly stupid plot with, like, big CGI effects, like, all of these things. That was all. I just thought it was going to be big, blustery, colorful, like flashing lights, fighting robots. And yes, there are big fighting robots, you know, of course, CGI. But also, there is a plot line, and there is a character that we can actually learn about and actually see grow and develop. So, critics have said that it was good. Critics have said it is the Transformers movie that we have all been waiting for. I was ready to be proven wrong. I will be talking, of course, about Bumblebee. And then I also want to compare it to Transformers because for me, Transformers, the first one, that's the one that I remember the most. It also has a protagonist. It also involves the protagonist connecting with Bumblebee. So we'll see where this goes. First, we'll start with Bumblebee. This film was directed by Travis Knight. It was written by Christina Hudson. It stars Hailee Steinfeld, who plays Charlie, alongside Jorge Lendeborg Jr. as Memo. Also, John Cena as Agent Burns, Jason Drucker as Otis, Pamela Adlon as Sally, and Steven Schneider as Ron. This film takes place in the year 1987, and the Autobot Bumblebee finds refuge in a junkyard in a small California beach town. Charlie, on the cusp of turning 18 and trying to find her place in the world, discovers Bumblebee, who at this point is battle-scarred and broken. The two develop a friendship, and we get to watch both of them grow throughout this film. If you don't know, this film takes place in a timeline that is different from the previous Transformers movies. So, like, the previous Transformers movies are directed by Michael Bay. This one, different from the other ones in the series, is directed by Travis Knight. Also different, this takes place in 1987. The timeline is different. Obviously, it takes place before the first Transformers movies in the original Transformers series. So you just kind of have to, like, ignore the time difference. It doesn't really fit in perfectly to the existing series. Also, if you don't already know, Transformers are alien robots that can take on the shape of mechanical objects like cars, planes, helicopters, and even boomboxes. They're based off the Hasbro toys, but they are by the same name. Also, there are Transformers comics. There's animated TV show, also made by Hasbro. Honestly, they're like big money. They first came out as toys with Hasbro paired up with a Japanese company, and they were like little toys that you could transform from, like, you know, it's a tiger into like a truck. And so that's what made them popular. And then, of course, we come up with like the animated TV show and the comics, and it all just gets mass produced. And that's why we have the Transformers films now. This film for me, I have to admit, I didn't like grow up watching Transformers. I am not super well versed in the other things like the animated series, but watching this really, in a way, it felt like closer to the animated series, just like with the opening. Like in the opening scene, it provides some of the background for the Autobots and the Decepticons. There's the Autobots, which are fighting the Decepticons, and it just looks like this scene that I could imagine in an animated series. Also, people have commented on some of the designs of the Autobots and the characters. They're like a little bit more like square looking, like in like their build, which is a bit more like related to the toys in the original animated series. So to me, it felt like it came out of this animated series, which is so like the robots are fighting. And in the other original Michael Bay films, they're very Earth-centered and centered on like the Autobots defending Earth. And seeing this scene really felt like it's about the Autobots. It's about their background story. It's about their planet. And that was really interesting. I'm really glad they opened with that. And it provided me background because all I know is the Michael Bay films. So just being able to see more about the Autobots and where they come from is very helpful. And I think it sets up sort of like the build of these characters. Also, related to the opening scene, like there are some good giant robot fights. Like, I know this is obvious because this is a modern film with modern CGI, but the effects are way better than the original. It's a serious glow up. Yes, I did say that. It's in my notes. I'm going to say it. But the CGI is so much better. And I did enjoy some big robot fights. Like when I sat down in the theater and the opening scene was robots fighting, I was like settling in. I'm like, yeah, I can totally get behind this. Giant robots just like punching each other and shooting each other with giant guns. I was totally in on it. Also, like like the whole environment is CGI and the whole planet looks very impressive. It reminded me of like the Avengers movies and like in Thor, like Asgard is like this big CGI world. It reminded me of that. It was very well done. And it's this exciting scene. So when you start the film, you're just put right into the action immediately. And almost in a way, the movie just like slows down from that point, not in a bad way. But I mean, it's so action packed in the beginning and then that kind of trickles down until it gets brought back up in the climax when there's, another giant robot fight. Besides just the impressive giant robot fights, there is a friendship that develops between Bumblebee and Charlie. And then also what is interesting about this film, and I think what separates it from the other Transformers films, and something that other critics have mentioned as well, is that in this film, Bumblebee is really a character. Like, not just a car. And also, when I watched the original Transformers film, I was like, maybe that's just, like, the limitations of the CGI effects. But, like, Bumblebee is a car so often, it felt like, in the original Transformers. And then in this newer film, Bumblebee, I feel like it was just constantly being transformed from car to robot, robot to car. And I was like, maybe that's just, like, the technology just got better. But I really felt like Bumblebee had more of a character, also as a side note, they changed the car in like the original Transformers. Like Bumblebee is like a Camaro, and then in the Bumblebee film, the most recent one, Bumblebee is a bug, like a Volkswagen Bug or a punch buggy or a slug bug, as some know it. So they make Bumblebee different, more emotive, like likable, really, and at times even sympathetic. I felt in the original Transformers, I don't know Bumblebee as a character, like Bumblebee doesn't talk. I feel like a big point that they make in this one is that Bumblebee kind of talks, even though Bumblebee has to talk through the radio, like as a car. But you really get the idea that Bumblebee is communicating so much more than you get from the original Transformers. It's almost like in the original Transformers, Bumblebee is like the sidekick and like the wingman of Shia LaBeouf's character. So you really get to know Bumblebee, and like because of that, this film has been compared to E.T. because of the relationship that forms between Charlie and Bumblebee. Of course, Bumblebee is an alien robot, hence relation to E.T. being an alien. But you see this relationship, and it is interesting because Bumblebee is like scared in the beginning, and that has to do with how Bumblebee ends up on Earth, and like his memory gets wiped and some of his fight, I guess you could say, his fighting spirit gets wiped. And so like you see Charlie, Haley Steinfeld's character, have to befriend Bumblebee and be sensitive and understanding and try to communicate, all of which are really different from what I got the sense from the Shia LaBeouf films and from the Michael Bay films. Bumblebee is not just punching things. Bumblebee is like communicating, which is a really nice change. And Bumblebee becomes this very cute character. Sort of reminded me of like a Disney character or something. Like Bumblebee is adorable, sort of like a cute like woodland creature or something in like a classic Disney film. Anyway, we're going to take a quick break and then we'll be right back and keep talking about Bumblebee.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. Keith keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further, because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movie Podcast. We are continuing to talk about the Transformers film Bumblebee. Another point that I want to bring up, and something that I mentioned a little bit, and the reason why I went to go see this film is because of the critics and the critical reviews that I read. Many critics have pointed out that what sets this film apart from the other Transformers films is that this one is way more plot-driven as opposed to just action-driven. This film really gives a deeper backstory to Charlie, who's the protagonist. And also, like, related to this, because Haley Steinfeld is such a good actor, she can really carry a heavier character-building role. And you really do see that. This performance by Haley Steinfeld reminds me of her performance in the film The Edge of 17. We did a previous podcast episode about that film. In both films, she's an angsty teenager. I would say she's more likable in this particular film, in Bumblebee. And in an interview, that is one of the things she mentioned, that she wanted Charlie to be a bit more likable, but also tough and like also pretty all at the same time. And I think like they achieved that to some extent. There are parts about Charlie like in the very beginning that are not likable, but she has the angsty teenager vibe going on, and they also explain why. Because like in both films you see the angsty teenager, I feel like that brings in the story of like, is she going to change? Is she going to like develop? Like what else is going to happen? And you see that the reason she becomes angsty is because of her father passing away, and that happens in both films. In Bumblebee, in both films it's like a point that really shapes her, but I feel like it's a much bigger plot point in Bumblebee, potentially because it happens like it's more recent of an event, and it really gives this story a launching point on which character development can take place. And this really separates this movie from all the other Transformers films. You get way more plot and character points. It drives the film. It's something that like they make Bumblebee more emotive and emotional because of how Bumblebee learns about the passing of Charlie's father. Like that doesn't happen in the original like Transformers film. Bumblebee doesn't connect with the main character because of some event that happened, and sadness and empathy that doesn't come up in the other films, but that really does come up in this film. And that's something that's really interesting, that they went for that as opposed to just action. And again, that just shows just the difference in the writing. The screenwriter is different, and like the screenwriter in this film is Christina Hudson, and she really tried. Her and the director Travis Knight really tried to make this a deeper story, different from the Michael Bay films. Also, I want to mention, there was really only one joke that landed for me in this film, and it was delivered by the Mr. John Cena. Also, I thought that John Cena was going to play a bigger role in this film. I was kind of surprised by how minimal I felt his role was. I thought it'd be bigger. He ended up playing a much smaller part. Sort of, I've seen him compared to like the Captain Ahab from Moby Dick. His character like sees the Transformers, and then years later he's like always searching for the Transformers again, always trying to like hunt them down and make them leave Earth and, you know, just kick them out the planet. So he kind of becomes that type of character. He's not really a villain, but he does play like a heavy in this movie. He's like the character that is always suspicious of what the Autobots and the Decepticons do. But also because of that, he sort of has it out for Bumblebee, which of course comes into conflict with Charlie, because she knows Bumblebee to be a good Autobot. And like there are some jokes that sort of made me smile a little bit. There was really only one joke that actually made me laugh. So that to me is very different from the early Transformers film, which I will mention when we talk about that film. But that is a big difference. And I think that really, again, just emphasizes how much of a different direction they were going in with this film, how they wanted it to really have more of a heart than just something that made you laugh. So that was an interesting point to me. I'm still torn if I like that more. It just depends. I guess it really depends on what mood I'm in, you know? Like, do I want to laugh more or do I want to, like, actually feel for the character? Which, I'm sorry, Shia LaBeouf, you're a great actor, but your character wasn't written to make me feel for you. Also, I want to bring up a point, and this is a question that I think is interesting and perhaps worth talking about in our current day and age, but does it make a difference that the protagonist in this film is a girl? Like, in a Transformers film or the Transformers series, does it make a difference that the protagonist is female? Like, do you think that will affect how many people go to see this movie? And I'm curious because in my mind, much of the audience of this film is young boys and most likely male, like comic book nerds. But does having a female protagonist as opposed to the male Shia LaBeouf in the original, does that make the theater goers maybe not want to go see this film, not want to go see Bumblebee? Like, I guess I'm asking for a friend, but much of my like cynical side feels that the perceived audience for this film, the male comic book nerds and like young boys, they might avoid a female protagonist driven story. And like maybe my perceived audience is like evolving and growing. I don't know. It's just something that I've thought about, and I'm curious, you know, if anyone wants to send me what they think, I would love to know. But I'm curious. The numbers for this film, the box office has not nearly been as good as, for instance, like the first Transformers. It hasn't been as good as Paramount, which is the production company. They obviously wanted more. Also, all these really big budget action films, all the Transformers films do really well in China in box offices and worldwide. But they are saying that part of the reason this might not have done so well is because it came out around the same time as other really heavy-hitting action films like Aquaman, for example. And Aquaman did really good in the Chinese box offices and domestically. So they're saying it could be that Bumblebee just can't compete with Aquaman, and that's why the sales weren't as good. And also because of that, people have said that may affect like if they want to produce other Transformers films based off of Bumblebee and follow this plot line, they said that, you know, that might mean the studio won't do it. They won't risk the money because it's not a guaranteed, you know, cash cow coming back. And I don't know. I don't know if that has to do with the protagonist or honestly if it's just because we've seen so many Transformers films or if because this is more of a character-driven story. I'm not sure. It is interesting. It did still make a lot of money, obviously in the millions, but, you know, I think it's still an interesting point. And maybe I'm underselling the audience. Maybe the audience to this film is evolving. It's just that we're, you know, fatigued on Transformers films. Like, this is the 6th one. Like, we really don't need another. Perhaps that's what it is. Also, the trailer didn't look great, so perhaps other people just haven't read the critical reviews that I have, which has made them want to go see it. I'm not sure. Also, another point that I want to mention, this film has great CGI robots and an actual story about a girl, you know, a girl and her robot, classic. But it also has a cute romance between Charlie and her neighbor, Memo, who is played, again, by Jorge Ledenborg Jr. And a note on this romance. So Charlie is a strong girl, and there's like the closing romantic scene that comes, and like you know, like the whole movie they're just leading up to this romance between the two stars, Charlie and Memo. But then at this last scene, Memo goes to hold her hand, and she kind of like gently pushes it away and like says that she's not ready for that yet. You know, they haven't gotten there. And to be honest, I didn't feel satisfied with this romantic ending. In other words, I am now conditioned to just want a kiss and then have the camera zoom out and the credits roll. And I wasn't satisfied with the fact that Charlie is a strong woman who doesn't need no man. But really, I just wanted a bigger romance. And that's because my brain has been trained to expect that. Because like I don't want to wait to like see the romance change if there is another movie, or you know, I don't want to wait that it's like the romance is going to be on her terms. I just want the credit roll kiss scene to guarantee me that like they do get together after this film. So in other words, my soul has been sold to Hollywood romance. Also, that is very different from the end of the original Transformers film, which like ends with like a makeout scene. So very different. But I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting point. I was like, I've been so conditioned to just expect like the ending romantic kiss. It's like a Hallmark movie. But I don't know. Good for them. I feel like that's really just a sign that the times are a-changing. And good also for Haley Steinfeld. I don't know if she had a say in how that ended for her character, but good on her. As an interesting side note, apparently in Ohio, they will be having a big robot that looks like Bumblebee, so kind of a real-world Bumblebee Autobot, which will be coming to visit fans in local Walmarts. I don't know if that's still happening, but I saw it, and it's really interesting. It's also like, it's going to Walmart? Interesting. Like, maybe Bumblebee had to pick up some groceries. I'm not sure. But if you're in the area, you can go visit Bumblebee at your local Walmart. So you can look it up online for the tour dates, I guess you could say. Anyway, we're going to take a break, and then we'll be right back and continue our movies episode.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Movies podcast. We are continuing talking about the Transformers series. I just mentioned Bumblebee, which is the most recent film in the series, and now I want to jump way back to 2007 to talk about the first Transformers film, which of course is just called Transformers, the original in the series. This film, like the other Transformers films in the series, was directed by Michael Bay. It was written by Roberto Orci, Alex Kurtzman, John Rogers. Also, Steven Spielberg is an executive producer of the Transformers series, which I didn't know. He's listed as a producer for Bumblebee as well. Apparently, he got involved because he really just likes the story of Transformers. Also, I have a hard time imagining that he was going to, pass up a potential really big cash cow franchise. I don't think that's his style. I'm pretty sure he would very quickly sign on to that. I'm sorry, Steven Spielberg. I'm not trying to say that you're just like a sellout, but I'm just saying it's your style. This film, I'm sure you all know, it stars Shia LaBeouf as Sam Witwicky, Megan Fox as Michaela Baines, Josh Duhamel as Captain Lennox, Tyrese Gibson as a tech sergeant, Rachel Taylor as a government techie, Maggie Madsen, John Voight as Defense Secretary John Keller, John Turturro as Agent Simmons. Also, Bernie Mac is in this movie. He plays Bobby Bolivia, who is a car salesman who sells Shia LaBeouf's character, Sam Bumblebee. He's very funny, and it made me kind of sad to see him because he's no longer with us. Also, I'm sure many of you have seen this movie. Oh, also I'm aware that Bumblebee has been out for a while in theaters, so I'm sure many of you have also seen Bumblebee as well. I know it's not super new, and I know that Transformers isn't super new, but again, I do think the comparison is interesting. Anyway, I'm sure many of you know, but in case you didn't, the story is that there is an ancient struggle between two Cybertronian races, the heroic Autobots and the evil Decepticons, and this battle comes to Earth along with a clue to the ultimate power, which is held by a teenager played by Shia LaBeouf. The teenager, of course, is Sam Witwicky, who is the protagonist. And a fun background, like little fun fact. For the first film, producer John Murphy was planning a G.I. Joe film adaptation. But then the U.S. launched the invasion of Iraq in 2003, so Hasbro instead suggested adapting the Transformers franchise as opposed to the G.I. Joe franchise. I mean, obviously because G.I. Joe is just too related to war and maybe too close to home for a lot of people. I read that, I thought that was really interesting, especially because this film, the Transformers film, opens up like related to the U.S. in conflict in the Middle East. So I thought that was interesting that they sort of skirted the issue, but also made it relevant without it being too in your face. Interesting. Also, I just want to start by saying this film is funnier than Bumblebee, and it also has more action. I'm not saying that Bumblebee doesn't have a bunch of robot fighting action, because it does, especially like in the beginning, as I mentioned, and there's like a climax scene when there's a big fight. But this just had a lot more to me. The action sequences were way longer. Also, again, Michael Bay directed this film and the other Transformers films, but not Bumblebee, and that really makes a big difference in the look and feel of the films. Like, the Michael Bay films, they just feel like a Michael Bay film. It's kind of yellow in tone. Everyone is like sweaty, like an 80s movie, and there's like sort of off-putting the camera angles, like where I look, I'm like, that's a little interesting. They're like an inch too low and they're looking up, and it's kind of weird. I mean, like, honestly, it just reminded me of the film Bad Boys, also by Michael Bay. Like, don't even get me started on that film. I did not enjoy it, but it's a Michael Bay film. It's different from the Travis Knight film, and you can really feel that. Like, what Bumblebee has improved upon, like, some of the dialogue was improved upon, I would say. Still not perfect, in my opinion. Bumblebee still didn't have perfect dialogue, but they improved some of the dialogue. Also, Bumblebee, of course, has more heart, and they put that really into the protagonist in this film. And, like, those elements of Bumblebee, in my opinion, replace, like, the action and jokes that are in this Transformers film. Of course, also, it gets, they replace, like, 2000s, like, mini skirts and cargo pants that apparently everyone just wore in 2007, and I'm really glad those aren't around anymore. But, what this film lacks in heart, it just replaces with more punching and flashing lights and jokes. Related to the jokes, I really forgot how funny and like how good of an actor Shia LaBeouf is. Like, I haven't seen him in anything for a while. So seeing him in this film, it reminded me like, oh yeah, he really is good. He has like a great, like, casual, like, devil-may-care sort of way of acting. He's very believable in this role, and he's very, very entertaining. Also, whatever happened to Megan Fox? Like, watching this film reminded me of what, like, a big, like, sex symbol she was. So it's interesting. I don't know what happened to her. Someone tell me. Also, this film was funnier than Bumblebee was, and I think that humor combined with the action just made this film very entertaining. Not that I'm saying Bumblebee wasn't entertaining, but honestly, I might have found this more entertaining. But before all the critics, like, crucify me, I will say There were cringy lines throughout this film, and about halfway through the movie, I started maybe I understand why critics said Bumblebee is the Transformers film we've all been waiting for. Because about halfway through, I forgot what the plot points of Transformers were because there was just so many fight scenes. I just couldn't remember what they were fighting for anymore. I was like, what does the cube thing, the Allspark, what does that do again? I don't really remember. Why are they going after it? Also, that's a terrible plan. And once I was like, oh yeah, those things, then I started to understand why critics find Bumblebee to be better. Yet I still have to say, despite those plot holes and the fact that I kind of forgot what they were up to, despite that, I did still enjoy this film. It doesn't go into deeper plot points, but that's okay. And of course, the CGI isn't as good as it is in Bumblebee, because Bumblebee is more modern. Also, Transformers, this film, there's just way more car product placement and so many more explosions. But of course, it's an action film, so of course there are more explosions. Also, as a side note, just to warn you all, when I first watched this film, I watched it with my mom, when I was a kid. And I remember after the film, my mom told me that she was like, man, I almost had a seizure watching that film. From all the flashing colors and the effects and the explosions and all of the movement. It was almost too much for her. So you've all been warned. Don't be like my mom and almost have a seizure watching this. Man, I don't know. I don't think I've seen... Did I see Avatar with her? I don't know. Anyway, so many effects. It was almost too much. Honestly, Transformers is almost like comfort food to me. It's kind of cold out right now and it's rainy. So if I just think about a movie that I just want to curl up and watch and not really think about, I would probably put in Transformers. There's not a lot of thought. There's just punching robots, which, I'm like, okay, I can get behind. I know this movie's going to end well. I know that they're going to, they'll all be okay. And there are 5 more films, so someone has to survive. Also, I enjoyed these films. They're entertaining. And if you want to go watch something else, if you don't feel like watching Transformers, if you have not already, please go watch the Shia LaBeouf song, specifically the Shia LaBeouf song Performance, which is on YouTube. This doesn't have to do with Transformers or Michael Bay or Bumblebee. This is just a song that someone made about Shia LaBeouf and then made a dance choir opera performance to go along with it. Please watch it. Just type in Shia LaBeouf song Performance onto YouTube and you will find it. And it is absolutely spectacular. And I love it so much. Or you could see Shia LaBeouf in the Sia music videos, which are also great. Anyway, thank you all so much for listening to this podcast about Bumblebee and Transformers. And I hope you can tune in to the next Golden State Media movie podcast episode.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.